In this presentation, we'll be talking about fugues and focusing on the general information that will help us understand them. First, let's talk about imitative works in general. We've already looked at one such imitative work, the invention. And the fugue is one of many genres of imitative polyphony that crystallized in the Baroque. Typically, when we're looking at a fugue, it will have at least 3 voices, though some 2-voice fugues exist, like the E minor fugue from J.S. Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. The genre of the fugue built on a number of Renaissance styles that also utilized imitative polyphony. This includes the Ricercar, the Fantasia, the Canzona, and more broadly the use of imitative counterpoint that often began sections of vocal compositions in Renaissance counterpoint. Over time, the process that we now think of as fugue became more ritualized, so that by the late Baroque we see certain formal areas and structural techniques that are commonly utilized in almost every fugue written during that period, particularly when we focus on the works of Germanic composers like Bach and Handel. Let's talk a little bit about the origins of the name fugue. One of the theories about the origins of the name is that it comes from the text painting of the setting of the Latin word fuga, which means flight. This word was often set with rapid imitative counterpoint, as we'll see momentarily in Carlo Gesualdo's Tristis et Anima Mea, one of the movements from his Tenebrae Responsories for Maundy Thursday. The text here, vos fugam capietis, means you shall run away. And we'll see how he illustrates that. Highlighted in blue here are all the running, flying motives. So we have a big chord on vos, which is basically saying you, and then this imitation of fugam. Going downwards first and then reversing direction and going upwards before being imitated downwards again. Before ending on that large chord. So this is a very brief example of one of these passages of imitative polyphony where we have these small snippets that are being imitated very rapidly in different voices. But this type of text painting was quite common in this style, particularly for the use of the word fugam, and frequently in specifically the setting of this text, we often see this cropping up. So that's one of the theories about how fugue emerged, but or the term fugue emerged, however we consider it, there are a few things about the structure of a fugue that we want to talk about, regardless of the origin of the name. In general, fugues will share a lot of structural similarities with inventions. This is one of the great reasons to study inventions first, because these structural elements crop up as well, but with inventions we're usually only dealing with 2 voices, so it's a little bit easier to grasp everything. But the structure here, even though we're adding in at least 1 more voice for 3, 4, or 5 voice fugues, we're still going to see a lot of these structural similarities. The exposition section will be present, in which all voices are introduced. We hear the subject in each voice at least once. Then we'll have a development or modulatory area. This tends to be the majority of the fugue, and this will alternate between episodes and middle entries, just like we had in inventions. Episodes will be areas of development, sequencing, and modulation in which the actual subject is not stated, but elements of the subject, some of the motives, could be developed. And then we'd have middle entries, which are statements of the subject material. And they'd be considered middle entry groups if multiple voices entered with the subject. At some point in the fugue, we will have a tonal return. We'll come back to the original key area. Sometimes this will be followed by a final entry and or a coda that will bring the piece to a close. So on the surface, this looks exactly like we saw inventions being structured. Exposition that introduces all the voices with the subject material, a development or modulatory area that alternates between episodes and middle entries, and at some point a tonal return potentially a final entry and or a coda. That brings us back around to the end of the piece. Now there is one section here that has a major difference, and that's going to be the exposition. This has the most significant change because the section now has to accommodate 3 voices, whereas the invention only had to accommodate 2 voices. And there's going to be 2 important things that will tend to crop up in fugues, and that is going to be the answer. The answer is simply the statement of the subject material in or implying the dominant. There will be some exceptions to this, but most of the time we'll see that it is in or implies the dominant. So it's simply a special form of the subject. It's just transposed. Because we have one of the voices implying the dominant, sometimes we will also have a bridge. The bridge will serve to modulate us back to the tonic after the statement of the answer. Let's take a look at this Fugue in C minor by J.S. Bach. First we have the subject. So that's our initial subject. It gives us a lot of motives to work with. That is going to be followed by an answer. And you will notice that this answer has been transposed up a fifth. There's a few other slight variations in it, but in general, most of the pitches are transposed up exactly a fifth. Excuse me. Let me actually play it up a fifth. Was in the wrong place. So here's what it sounds like together. So we've had our subject, and then we've had that subject material transposed up a fifth. We still consider it to be the subject, it's just specifically referred to as an answer because it's coming in on the dominant. This is sort of like the difference between squares and rectangles. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Well, all answers are subject material, but not all instances of the subject material are answers. Some of them are at the tonic, the level of the tonic. Now, by the time that we've finished our answer, we are clearly in G minor. We have a little imperfect authentic cadence. Now, before we jump back into our next voice entering on the subject, we have to somehow get back to the tonic. If we went directly from G minor to the subject, and then we were here, it'd be a little bit jarring, a little bit out of style. So what Bach does is writes a bridge, a little transition section which serves to modulate us back to the opening key area. Missed one B natural in there, I apologize. But one of the other things to note is that just like in the invention, the subject and the answer, when they're imitated, all have the relative placement in the measure as the same, the relative relationship to strong beats within the measure. So in each of these statements, the subject, the answer, and then when the subject returns, it begins on the and of one, the and of a strong beat. So this style is going to be as much a metric style as it is a harmonic and contrapuntal style. So we will want to see that those elements stay, those relationships to the strong beats of the measure stay there. But this would be the example of the exposition. Bridge. Last subject entry of the expo. just a few more notes about the subject and answer. Note that the answer, as I mentioned, is still considered subject material. It's just a specific form of the subject. So sometimes we might refer to subject material. I'll usually refer to subject material as an umbrella term to include both the subject, which is usually in the tonic, and the answer, which is usually in the dominant. Answers will also tend to fall into one of two types, which we will talk about more in the next presentation. Real answers, which are exact transpositions of the subject to the dominant, and tonal answers, which are transposed but have a slight change to them. In general, expositions will tend to alternate between the statement of the subject and the answer until all voices enter. So usually we'll go back and forth, subject, answer, subject, answer, subject. Sometimes there are some exceptions to this, depending on the tonal structure of the fugue, but most of the time we're going to see this alternation in the opening exposition. And this can continue for however many voices you have. If you have a 3-voice fugue, subject, answer, subject. If you have a 7-voice fugue, subject, answer, subject, answer, subject, answer, subject, etc. And though not always present, counter subjects are commonly utilized in fugues, just as we saw them in inventions. In other words, a counter subject material is a counterpoint that consistently appears against the subject material. And now that there are more voices, it is possible to have multiple counter subjects as well, as we'll see when we analyze the C minor fugue.